The Athletico PUBG roster that attended GLL Grand Slam achieved one of, if not the greatest result of an ANZ Esports team. This was a tournament that featured the best teams from Western regions after Phase 2 of 2019 and will forever be remembered as a what-if moment in the history of Oceanic Esports. Now, you may call me crazy for making such a statement, and you'd certainly not be wrong when you say that there are plenty of results within the Oceanic region that are noteworthy and deserve to be talked about, even on an international stage. You may be thinking of Rainbow Six with Fnatic, a team that attended Season 8 and Season 9 of Pro League and was able to make it through to the semi-finals of both of those competitions. Or perhaps you're thinking about the Chiefs, a team in Rocket League that managed to place top 4 in Season 6 of RLCS. Further to that, there's obviously Counter-Strike as well, where we have any number of solid teams that can compete internationally. One of which, obviously, is Renegades, formerly known as Greyhound, a team that's attended multiple majors, or even 100 Thieves, who, yes, are not domestically based here in ANZ, but are still predominantly an ANZ team, and a team that has managed to make it through to the semi-finals at a major, which was at the Starlighter Major in 2019. I think the difference in all of these examples is that Athletico at GLL Grand Slam legitimately looked like a world beater in this competition. Now, that's not to say that this was a surprise or anything like that to see the performances that Athletico were able to put in at that event. It really did feel like the perfect storm for the team and for the players who were all seemingly hitting their peak at the perfect time. As a result, of course, Athletico dominated domestically in Phase 2. They did miss out on Phase 1. They didn't manage to attend Face It Global Summit, dropping by 8 points to Incognito, who became the Oceanic representatives at that tournament. But going into Phase 2 and bolstered by the addition of Xtreme, it really did seem like Athletico had something to prove. They go into that tournament and absolutely blitz the competition. 540 points is what they ended up with after 40 games of competition. 218 points the difference between them and second place, which was Incognito at 322 points. Third place, hell yeah, brother, 293 points. Those were the three teams that went on to represent Oceania at GLL Grand Slam. The great thing about Athletico was not only the fact that they were able to get that many points on the board, but the consistency at which they were able to do that. They won 30% of their games, and they placed and got placement points out of 83% of their games. The other great thing about Athletico was, I've already mentioned the fact that they were peaking in form, and they continued to get better and better as this tournament went on, and we only really see the number one peak, the number one performance from them once they got to GLL Grand Slam. Yes, you may have your questions, of course, regarding the results of Phase 2, because Oceania is generally considered one of the weaker regions globally, not only in PUBG, but in esports in general. But I think the kind of dominance and consistency at which it was performed by Athletico sort of alluded to some greater things for that roster, regardless of the region that they're from. And obviously, Athletico wasn't just a champion team, but a team comprised of champions as well. And I would be remiss not to mention the individuals that comprised the roster. So, Zoidmate, to start things off, the number one IGL for the ANZ region, and someone who is said to be not a player that would go astray internationally if given those opportunities, and certainly not someone that is left behind fragging-wise either. Xtreme, a player that returned to Oceania from Wildcard, his stint overseas, and became a bit of a Terminator in Phase 2, averaging nearly 3 kills a game, and arguably in his best form ever, something that we may never even see Xtreme being able to replicate. Fludd, a newer, more unknown quantity that performed well in Season 1, but was able to flourish and really spread his wings in Season 2. And then, of course, Luke12, a player that went on to become one of the best in the world, and arguably at the time even was one of the best in the world, and was an absolute superstar for this roster. And it was quite clear as well that not only were all of these players some of the best in slot in ANZ, but they were all peaking and performing and hitting their best form individually as we led up to GLL Grand Slam. So, expectations were high for Athletico going into GLL Grand Slam. Maybe not as high as they were for teams like FaZe or Liquid or Na'Vi, who were generally considered the top competitors for that tournament. But they were definitely higher than they had ever been for any other Oceanic team going into a PUBG event, and maybe even for any other Oceanic team going into any esports event. So, day one, pretty decent day for Athletico. They fragged well, didn't have any amazing placings, but they were consistent enough, and they were 5th place after 6 games, which is a good enough launching pad, but certainly wasn't something that set the world on fire and didn't give the international community that much to really take a look at. No one was talking about Athletico in the context that they could be a world beater. No one thought that they would be a first place team after day one. But day two is where these storylines start to turn around, not only for Athletico, but for FaZe, who also had a decent but not amazing day one. Both teams have a big day here on day two, and it's really interesting to note the fact that both teams really kind of went tit for tat throughout the entire competition. It's the day where Luke12 becomes the talk of the town, and people start to believe the impossible can happen because Athletico are now in 2nd place after day 2, heading into the final day of competition. Anecdotally, for myself, I felt like there was a chance to watch Oceanic Esports history, and I had to stay up and watch the game. Now, here in ANZ, the matches were not at a great time. They were starting at something like 1 a.m. in the morning and not finishing until 5 a.m. But to have that opportunity to see Oceanic Esports history live was not something that I intended to miss. So, going into day 3, Athletico in 2nd place. Everyone's excited about them. Everyone's hyped. The Oceanic community is getting behind them. And they managed to find a 3rd place, a 1st place, and a 2nd place in the first 5 games, which puts them in 1st heading into game 18. And for anyone that wants to understand the context or the mindset of this for an ANZ fan, is that this is something that's never happened in ANZ history. No team in any esport has gone internationally and been in a position to win an S-tier major tournament. But Athletico have finally given us that kind of hope. And were it not for an ill-fated circle that saw FaZe center of the circle and getting a hard feed for game 18, it might well have been Athletico that took it all the way to 1st place after the end of GLL Grand Slam. Overall, Athletico hangs on for 2nd place by 2 points ahead of Na'Vi, and obviously 11 points behind FaZe, who went on to win game 18 in Milta Power. Even despite not going on to win the competition, Athletico managed a result that is unheard of from an ANZ team prior to this point. It's the only time that an ANZ roster has looked like they would win an S-tier international tournament, and it may end up being the best performance of any Oceanic esports team for a long time coming. Naturally, hopefully sooner rather than later, there will be more opportunities for ANZ esports teams to go international and test themselves against that stronger competition. Maybe even take that throne away from Athletico as one of the greatest of all time in ANZ esports. Right now, in PCS APAC, we have Fury, Astra, and Carnage competing in Series 1 and setting themselves up for success, giving themselves the building blocks against the better teams from the SEA region that will hopefully allow them to hit another level once these international competitions start back up again. That said, to imagine that a team can do what Athletico did at GLL Grand Slam is a difficult prospect for me personally. It really was the perfect storm for not only the players, but for the roster. Obviously limited funding coming from the ANZ region, but with these international tier players coming together and peaking at the right time, they did form a team that could compete at the tier 1 level. We will never really know what this team could have gone on to achieve had they remained intact as a roster. Luke12 obviously departing very soon after to go and make some Americans rage about ping or something like that. But who knows what they could have achieved had they stuck together. What I do know is that they will undoubtedly go down as the greatest Oceanic PUBG team of all time, and even one of the greatest of all time in ANZ Esports.